I call Lord Storey to ask the first oral question.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
I call the Minister, Lord Parkinson of Whitley Bay.
My Lords, the virus has the potential to affect all corners of society, and all of us has a role to play in reducing the risk of transmission. The Government has provided detailed guidance to the higher education sector, informed by SAGE, on reopening, and has ensured that universities have outbreak plans, have bolstered testing provision, and are planning for the end of term and the return of students in January. We're keeping this position under review and are monitoring developments closely.
Lord Storey.
The Minister will be aware of the outbreak of COVID cases at universities and colleges across the UK, with students having to self-isolate, often in very difficult circumstances. Can the Minister give an assurance there'll be sufficient testing capacity for students returning home for Christmas? And what plans have the Government got to test every student again before they return to their colleges and universities in January, so they are kept safe and the communities in which they live kept safe as well?
Well, my Lords, we've established walk-through testing sites and deployed mobile test sites so that almost all universities are within 1.5 miles of a testing site, so that staff and students alike who need to have access to tests if they develop symptoms. As part of our ongoing work, we've also started a series of pilots on lateral flow tests and are working with the Department of Health and Social Care to target mass asymptomatic testing at universities, and the ambition is to work with universities to build testing provisions, including the use of lateral flow devices.
The Viscount Hanworth.
My Lords, the advice of the SAGE Committee in September was that unless teaching at colleges and universities were to move online, then COVID outbreaks at universities would be inevitable. Given what has transpired, there is now the likelihood that after Christmas, many students will remain at home. Can the Government assure these students that they will not be bound by contracts of accommodation that they do not need? And will the Government also indemnify the universities against the claims of companies that have provided new build student accommodation for rents that they have been guaranteed?
Well, my Lords, throughout the pandemic we've been working closely with universities to make sure that they have plans in place locally, shared with their local directors of public health, to manage the specific risks in their area. We've been keen to keep universities open so that students and young people aren't putting their lives on hold or finding their education disrupted. We're keen for face-to-face teaching to continue as much as possible. Universities have risen to the challenge by also providing a blend of online teaching there, and of course we're working closely with students on accommodation and other issues.
Baroness Fox of Buckley.
Lord, last week 192 academics from the University of Manchester wrote to the Vice-Chancellor saying they were ashamed and humiliated at the erection of a metal fence literally locking students in their residence. The student slogan said it all: paid, blamed, caged. This might be extreme, but it's not a one-off. Will the Minister explain to Vice-Chancellors that such invasive, heavy-handed security measures are not necessary when COVID is not a lethal risk to the lives of students? And can I draw my noble Lord's attention to a student letter from Harry Butcher to UCU noting the limitations of low-quality online teaching? He writes, "It's impossibly demoralising to be educated in front of a laptop, most likely in the same room you sleep, sat on a chair half a metre from your bed. Minister, can you encourage more face-to-face teaching because it's safe and necessary?"
The noble lady's first question, yes, I saw the occurrence at Manchester University. That was a decision by Manchester University, not something encouraged by government guidance. I understand that the university's undertaking an inquiry of its own on the decision that it took and the communications around it, which will report by the end of this month, so that they can learn the lessons they need to. On face-to-face teaching, I mean, the government's expectation is that high-quality education should be maintained. Moving delivery online doesn't automatically mean that the quality of the provision is inferior, but we're keen to see face-to-face teaching, particularly in those subjects where that's important. The Office for Students has a role in monitoring this, is keeping that under active review, and if it has any concerns, can investigate further.
Baroness Varsi.
My Lords, I draw the House's attention to the relevant entries on my register of interests. Could my noble friend update the House on progress of plans for the mass testing of students in readiness of the travel window being proposed for early December? And what is the government's thinking on arrangements that will be put in place for the return of students to universities in the new year?
Honourable friend, the Universities Minister wrote to universities on the 7th of November with details on the mass testing programme. We're working closely with the sector on that, targeting mass testing at universities based on factors such as the local prevalence of COVID-19 and the proportion of high-risk students at their institution.
Lord Clement Jones.
Chair of a university governing body, can I pay my own tribute to staff and students in universities who are adapting so well to these exceptionally difficult conditions, and I do welcome the travel window Christmas guidance. But my Lords, urgent guidance is needed on the ability for staff and students to be able to return after Christmas to ensure minimum disruption for the new term. My Lords, when will that be available?
Well, yes, my honourable friend also wrote this week to universities and to students on the plans for returning home for Christmas and at the end of term. The Noble Lord's absolutely right. People will want a bit of certainty about the resumption of education in January. Our hope is that we'll be able to provide that guidance before the end of term so that they know going into the Christmas holidays the situation. But of course, like everything, it does depend on the developments in the virus and the pandemic.
Baroness Blackwood of North Oxford.
My Lords, rolling out mass testing in time for the proposed travel window, even in a targeted manner, is an enormous undertaking, and universities are naturally keen to understand the details. For example, will students be required to have 2 negative tests, as in Scotland, before being cleared to travel, or will 1 suffice? And will there be any liability on universities?
Well, Lords, we're working closely with the universities in line with the guidance that my honourable friend, the Universities Minister, has released. We're also working with the devolved administrations and the Department for Health and Social Care have briefed them and are continuing to work with them. The guidance for students in England is that only one negative test is required.
The Earl of Clancarty.
What arrangements is the government advising universities to carry out in the way of practical and mental health matters for students isolating at university, including over the Christmas period? Student space may be able to advise who is around, but the right people, not just fellow students, need to be close by in the first place.
Well, the Noble Earl is absolutely right to point to the problems that many students are facing in mental health and well-being. Student space, with funding from the Office for Students, is helping, and our higher education providers can also access the £256 million worth of funding this academic year to go towards student hardships funds and to provide support for mental health for those affected in the pandemic.
Lord Bassam of Brighton.
Well, it's been tragic to hear of the stories of so many COVID outbreaks at universities, which have clearly impacted on learning and students' mental health. Universities were asked to plan for a return on the basis of a fully functioning test, track and trace programme, which didn't happen. So, my Lords, can we be assured that the lateral flow devices will be available to universities and how many of them will need to be provided? And what steps are the government going to take to ensure there's a safe return in January with a staggered returning system? And will students require a testing service in the January period?
Well, my Lords, as I say, we are, as part of our work to develop new testing technology, we've started a series of pilots already on lateral flow tests and working with universities and the Department of Health and Social Care to roll that out. We also welcome the efforts of universities themselves in developing their own testing, which has shown the sort of innovation that we would expect from universities.
Baroness Thornhill.
Minister, a local government slant. How much consultation was done with local authorities before the decision was made to take the business as near to normal approach as possible? And were there any particular financial consideration given to those towns and cities that rely heavily on university students as part of their local economies, as these will surely be affected?
Well, as I say, we've required universities to have plans in place which have been signed off by their local directors of public health. That's obviously involved liaison with local authorities, elected representatives and health professionals in their local areas.